in example 3.2, we're going to be looking at algebraic expressions. Now the difference between an algebraic expression and an equation is that essentially expressions don't have an equal sign. So what exactly is an expression? Well, here, this is just going to be a combination of constants, which would just be numbers, and variables. And they're going to be joined by some arithmetic operation, such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So we're just looking at some combination here when we're talking about an expression. So when you look at an expression, if you have different parts that are separated by a plus or a minus sign, we're going to consider these as terms. If the terms have identical variables, then we would call these like terms. Sometimes we need to group together some terms, and we're going to use parentheses in order to group these terms together. So for example, in example 4, a supplier of electronics components charges P dollars for a certain transformer. If it costs C dollars to make, then you could think of the profit as P minus C dollars. Now, if we're selling N transformers and we want to find the total profit, we would need to know how many were sold, N, and then that net cost, that P minus C. So to combine that, we would do N, and then we would put P minus C in parentheses to help us know that that needs to be calculated first. We need to calculate the charge minus the cost. Another thing that we need to do in this section is just learn how to convert words into a formula. So for example 5, part A, we're looking for the frequency of a radio wave, and it equals, so that's going to tell us that we use equals as our symbol, velocity divided by wavelength. And you could write it just like that. Notice here I am using a cursive L because my L looks like a 1, so I will switch into that cursive L so that I know it's not a 1. Now in part B, the combined resistance C of two resistors, R lowercase and capital R, is the product of R and R divided by the sum. So how would we express this? Well, we're looking for the combined resistance C, and we know that we have a product. That means multiply. So we're going to do little r times big R, and then it's divided by, so that whole thing is going to be divided by, we'll use a fraction here, and then we have the sum, little r plus big R. You could also write this without the multiplication symbol, because that is the implied one, and you can just write the letters next to each other. We also want to sometimes include a square root. And so when you see the square root, the symbol will be like that, and it's going to equal some value. The value, a squared, gets you back to the value n that was under the square root. So that's the relationship here. You're looking for the number that, when squared, gives you the original value that was under the square root. Most calculators have a button to do this, but an example here, the square root of 16 is 4 because 4 squared gives you 16. Now looking at example 6, we're looking for the time it takes in seconds for an object to fall due to the influence of gravity equals the square root of the quotient of the distance fallen divided by 16. There's a lot going on here, but how would we write this as a formula? Well, we know the time is what we're looking for, and it equals the square root. So we know we're dealing with a square root. And it's the square root of a quotient. So we're looking at division. We need to use a fraction bar. And it's going to be the distance in feet fallen divided by 16. So the way the words are given in the verbal form is going to help us figure out how to write these into formula form. Example 7 is having us evaluate some of these formulas. So the conversion from Celsius to Kelvin, you have this equation K equals 273 plus C. If we knew that C was 20, what would the temperature be? So we have our formula, K equals 273 plus C, which in this case is 20, and that gives us that our degrees Kelvin is 293. If we wanted to find the profit on 6 transformers with a charge of $210 and the cost of $120, we'll use the formula that we had earlier. The profit equals N times the cost, times the price minus the cost. So what do we know here? We're selling 6 transformers. They cost $210 to produce. They're charging $210. They cost $120 to produce. To evaluate this, we need to do what's in the parentheses first. So 210 minus 120 is 90. And so our profit is 6 times 90, or $540. And then C, we're going to use the formula for the time based on the distance that an object falls. And we know here that the object is going to fall 144 feet. So we'll place that in D of the formula for distance, and the formula has us dividing by 16. Here, even though there aren't parentheses, the square root is acting like a set of parentheses, and so we would need to divide first. 144 divided by 16 is 9, and then you would take the square root of 9. That would give us 3, and our units here are in seconds. And the last example is converting from Fahrenheit to Celsius. This is something that comes up frequently because the United States uses Fahrenheit, but in the metric system, Celsius is the scale for temperature. So if you knew that the temperature was 10 degrees Fahrenheit and you wanted to convert that into Celsius, you would simply plug that into our formula, 5 divided by 9, and then we group the Fahrenheit temperature, which is 10 here, and we subtract 32. We will have negatives, and that's okay, but we need to subtract first. Since that's in the parentheses, 10 minus 32 gives us negative 22. And then we multiply by 5 and divide by 9. The way you would type this into the calculator for that fraction is 5 divided by 9, and then multiply by your negative 22. You'll get the answer of negative 12.2 degrees Celsius.